Thank you, front row. I love it. They were here this morning. They've come back for more. They're fools. My name's Rachel Gardner. I'm a member of this church. Lovely to see you this evening. I can't always make Sunday evenings. Normally my husband Jason is here, and he serves alongside Rod. And tomorrow is our 14th wedding anniversary. And it was my mum, oh thank you, it was my mum who's staying with us today who said, oh darling, what are you guys going to do tomorrow? And I said, what for, Mum? Your wedding anniversary. So Jason and I both forget it. But on our 5th wedding anniversary, number 5 apparently is wood. And Jason took me, pre-children, it was pre-Daisy this was, we went for dinner to Woodstock. And over a lovely glass of wine and a lovely curry in an Indian restaurant, I said to Jason, when you were younger and you imagined being married, did you imagine it would be like this? I was really setting him up for romantic comment of the year, and he said without dropping a beat over his onion bhajis, when I was younger, I imagined being a ninja warrior. So I don't have very high hopes for tomorrow, but I'm definitely excited to be his wife. Let's read the passage together, shall we? It's Mark 16. Verse 1 to 8. And for those of you that are new joining us, we've been going all the way through Mark's Gospel. And every sermon has had the word irresistible in front of it. We've been looking at different aspects of the ministry of Jesus according to Mark. And we're getting right towards the end. So grab a Bible from the side or on your phone. And we're reading from Mark 16, verse 1 to 8. And it's going to come up on the screens as well. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Don't know how committed to ends of stories you are. I think I heard an apocryphal story once about a friend going on holiday and taking loads of, I think, pre-Kindle as well. Gosh, I'm showing my age tonight. Taking a paperback, and her friend knew how committed she was to finding the end of the story, and she glued the last couple of pages to the back of the book so my friend couldn't read the ending. And my poor mum, when I was living at home, when I was a teenager, we had this ancient VCR machine, and we would sort of go to church on a Sunday evening and try and record the latest sort of period drama series. And invariably, the VCR would record the series, the episode, right up until the last 2.5 minutes. And invariably, it would just cut out. And I would probably shout something really lovely and gracious and teenagey to my mum, like, Mum, you are ruining my life! And it's just really frustrating, isn't it, when you don't know the ending? Well, guys, here is the ending of Mark's account of Jesus. And most of the reliable manuscripts end it here. We have in our Bible a few more verses that were possibly added later by people who knew what they were talking about. They are valid, they're accurate, they're godly, and they're good. But I'm not going to talk about them tonight. I'm going to stop at verse 8 and see what is it that Mark, who's been taking us on this incredible journey of revelation into who Jesus is and what he's about, why does Mark choose to do this? So I'm going to look at 3 headings, really. Brave new world. What does this mean? That he is not here, he is risen. What's Mark telling us about the nature of Jesus, the new nature of this risen body? What does that mean for us? And then we're going to look at, here comes the fear again, because the women's response is, yay! No, it's, oh, what's going on? And Mark ends it there. He doesn't end on an alleluia. He ends on an, oh no! And then we're going to end with keep eyes front. Where is Jesus? What's he doing? And what does that mean for us? And what a beautiful way to be ushered into God's beautiful table of communion afterwards. So number one, the brave new world. And in my house, series on Netflix like The Waking Dead have a lot of priority. We love sort of post-apocalyptic films that imagine what would the world look like if it all went to pot and then a little kind of group of people survived and they rebuilt the world. What would that look like? And there's something quite captivating about those kinds of films and series. Nobody's nodding at me yet. I think I'm a zombie lover on my own here, aren't I? And there's something quite captivating about these stories that sort of say there's something that gives a lot of meaning to life when you really have to fight for it, when you really have to imagine it's been so hopeless, but now there is a glimmer of hope, and there is a new brave world that's being ushered in when hopelessness is over and there is hope on the horizon. And look at the opening sentence in this passage tonight in Mark chapter 16. The opening sentence is one of those kind of statements. We could read it as, the Sabbath's over, it's the next day. But I think Mark is trying to say something more powerful to us. He's saying, you've just read and heard about the brutal death, the torture, the brutality, the suffering of Jesus. You've just read about his body being taken off the cross and stuck in a tomb. You've just read of the grief of the disciples. But this is a new morning, and the Sabbath is over. There has never been a Sabbath in history like that Sabbath. God is dead. Well, he's not dead, but his son is buried in the ground. And the disciples are saying, what's going on? We thought he'd come to kick the Romans out. We thought he'd come to usher in this whole new world. We hoped. We had this dawning revelation of who he is. We were with him when he did these incredible things. We were there when he raised dead people and sick people, and he fed thousands of people, and there was so much hope. But now that is dashed, and that's gone. And Mark says that the Sabbath is over. That hopelessness, that despair, that death, that destruction, that's gone. And something new is about to happen. And the first day of the new week is not just the first day of the new week. It's the first day of the new world. And the herald of this is that young man, that angel, sat in the tomb saying, he's not here. I don't want to speak words that angels might speak, but I wonder if he was sat there going, can't wait. They're going to be here any minute. I've got something amazing to tell them. He's not here. He's risen. He's ahead of you. He's in Galilee. And we know, don't we, because we've read the book of Acts, or we've heard people talk about the book of Acts, and I would encourage you as a result of tonight, go and read the first couple of chapters of Acts, because we know that although this passage is left here, we know what happened. We know that the women must have told somebody, because we know. We read the book of Acts and we see what happens when ordinary men and women like you and I, who are full of anxiety and fear and uncertainty and self-doubt, we know what happens when the Spirit of the risen Jesus is poured out on them at Pentecost with such power that they have confidence to boldly witness. And on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people came to faith in the risen Jesus. We know what happens. But Mark doesn't tell us about that. Mark just leaves us with a story of silence and a story of fear. And I think it's been a little bit of a theme all through Mark. It's kind of, here comes the fear again. Here comes that very normal, very natural human response to seeing something that completely is outside of our human experience. And often our first reaction is, I sometimes watch Dynamo on telly, and I would love to go and see him live. But whenever you watch Dynamo, who's this phenomenal kind of trickster, it's all kind of card play, isn't he? He hides things, and he's phenomenal at it. But when he does these phenomenal things like find a card and it's in the window and all this kind of thing, people's reaction is, it is terror, isn't it? Actually, their initial reaction is, how did you do that? That's outside of my normal experience. And although for him it's very clever, a kind of trickster, even though we know that, it's still the reaction in us is, what on earth are you doing? Who are you? And that's what happens here. Here comes the fear again. Mark ends with fear and silence. Why does he end with silence rather than alleluia? Well, here's a thought I want to bring to you. I wonder if he ends with silence because it's a silence that acknowledges how impossible it is to put some things into words. And the words in that scripture that they're used here in the NIV of fear and trembling can be translated, some would say, as trauma and ecstasy. Actually, what these women are experiencing isn't sort of terror that makes you necessarily run away for your fear for your life. It's the trauma of ecstasy. Oh my goodness! What if this is what I think it is? It's that kind of, I can't contain this, I'm overwhelmed. And I was sharing with the guys this morning that recently I was asked to speak to a bunch of about 1,000 youth workers about a cause that is, you have those things that are just, they're on your heart all the time. And you're given half a second and you just want to talk about it. Do you know that stuff? Do you have something every now and then that just sits there? It's not very low under the surface, is there? So for me, that's about adoption and fostering. And that's one of those things that I just feel I carry. I'm completely passionate about vulnerable children who don't have a home, a secure, stable home. And so I had the chance to speak for 5 minutes to all these brilliant youth workers who share my passion for young people. And I had my talk all planned, my little I'm going to convince you in 5 minutes. And I stood up in front of them and thought, I don't need to do any convincing. You guys are sold out for Jesus, and you're sold out for kids, and you're sold out for young people. But I just began to feel completely overwhelmed. It wasn't stage fright. It wasn't that I didn't know what to say. But I just could not contain that kind of trauma and ecstasy. That sense of, what would happen if 1,000 Christians now went to the local authority now and said, those kids are the hardest to place, we're going to have them. Could you imagine the impact in society? Could you imagine the impact of those children's lives? 30% of homeless adults on the street are there, and part of their story is they're in care. The prison population is packed full of men and women who've experienced life in care. And even as I'm speaking now, I can feel that. I almost can't talk about it. And I wonder for the women who had watched Jesus closely. They knew him, they loved him. They'd seen him elevate women, value women. Women were less than dogs in that culture. He saw them. They'd seen him value the woman who was bleeding all her life, treating lepers and the rich and the poor the same. They'd watched this. And then I watched him die in the grief, and then to be at the tomb and be told, he's not here, he's alive. Oh my goodness. I think I would go and hide under the covers for a couple of days thinking, what do I do with this? This is too amazing. What do I do with this? So Mark, I think, invites us to stand in trauma and ecstasy and fear and trembling with these women to say, what are you going to do with this empty tomb? Here's a beautiful quote. The words are coming up on the screen from Joan Mitchell. The silence of the last disciple characters surviving in the narrative bring the readers and hearers, us, to their own threshold of faith, to the limit of words to speak the unspeakable, and to the limit of human experience to trust who is beyond death. I mean, Mark is addressing the age-old dilemma. No matter how sophisticated we get with our technology, no matter how comfortable our lives can become increasingly, no matter how well we do or not well at stuff, we all face death. And the question that every soul on the planet asks at some point is, what's after that? Am I just a body that's worm food? Or is there something on the other side? And in the face of our limitations, our inability to answer this, fear and awe is the natural response, isn't it? It's our hearts yearning to believe what our minds can't fully comprehend. But actually something in us is being pulled and drawn and wooed and said, what if the tomb is empty because Jesus is alive? What are the implications of that? And so fear is the natural response because, well, I suppose firstly, a miracle is a phenomenon outside of the normal range of human experiences. And for Mark, he doesn't call them miracles. Through his gospel, he calls the incredible things Jesus does, he calls them deeds of power because they're not demonstrations of his clever skills at making us look the other way. little aside. I once did an assembly with a load of little primary school children where I got them a few to come to the front, and I screwed up a ball of paper, and I got them to get really close, and I went, 1, 2, 3, and I just threw it out of the circle. But because I got them looking really, really close, they couldn't see me doing that. And they were, whoa, you're amazing. That's not what Jesus is doing. He's not doing things to make us go, whoa, you've got amazing skills. You're not only a good teacher, but you do really cool stuff. That's not what these miracles are about. They're deeds of power to demonstrate God's power and authority, his ability to enter human experience and do things that just take our breath away, that go against the rules of stuff, that just bring us up all the time to what are you going to do about this? You can walk away and ignore it, but what are you going to do about a God who can do this, who can bring someone back to life, who can heal a terminal sickness, who can calm a storm? And we also, I think, we see fear as a natural response because of what it might mean, the implications of what just happened here. If what just happened here is what I think just happened here, oh my goodness, what happens next? Have you ever seen God do a deed of power in your life? Have you ever seen God do something that's outside of normal human experience in yours or someone else's life? The implications are huge, aren't they? If God can do that, what can't he do? And so fear is a natural response. And we often see this jumping up in Mark's gospel. Rod did a wonderful sermon. If you're first time with us tonight, all our sermons are on our website. They're online, and you can go back and listen to other sermons on Mark's gospel. And a great one, I'd really recommend all of them. But Rod did a wonderful sermon on Jesus calming the storm. And I'd never seen it before. That when the disciples awoke him because he was fast asleep in the boat, and this terrible storm's going on around them, and Jesus speaks to the storm. He has power over the natural order, and he says, peace, be still, and the storm is immediately calm. The disciples' reaction isn't, oh, great, nice one, mate, thanks. That'll make fishing a whole lot easier. It says that actually they are full of fear. Because the storm was terrifying, but the one that can calm the storm, who's bigger than the storm, is in the boat with them. I mean, the story of the woman who is caught in adultery, and I'm sure it's a complete setup for her. I'm sure she's a complete victim of the terrible unjust system of the day, and she's dragged before the Pharisees, and they want to stone her, and they want to kill her, and they want to catch Jesus out, and whatever he does, he's going to be kind of condemned in somebody's eyes. And Jesus cleverly writes on the ground, and the Pharisees all walk away, and he says, if you are without sin, you cast the first stone. And eventually, everybody goes. And you think, great, she's with the one person she's the safest with. And then you say, oh my goodness, if you're without sin, cast the first stone. The only person who actually could mesh out any judgment on her is the person that she's having a one-to-one with right now. Mark reminds us constantly, never forget who this Jesus is. Never forget the authority and power that he has. And I think Mark is interested in the fear and the awe that leads to faith, the leap of faith that says, actually, this is not positive thinking. This is not getting all my ducks lined up in a row and then saying, it makes sense, now I'll believe. But that leap that says, there's something here that takes my breath away. There's something here that I cannot deny. There's something here that is completely outside of the way I normally work. There's something that's so much bigger than me. My response is either I run away from this or I leap into this. And that's what Mark's interested in, that response. God is still today doing his extraordinary thing in our lives. And do we see it? And will we be witnesses to it? And I think Matthew's gospel and Luke and John, I haven't studied this in great depth, but I would say possibly if you want to make a real apologetic for the resurrection, that Jesus definitely rose, it wasn't a kind of a created state of affairs, I don't know that you would go to Mark for that, because Mark, I think, is less interested in evidence and he's more interested in obedience. The tomb is empty. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to tell people about this? And he leaves the women saying nothing. And it's a challenge thrown to us. Will you say nothing? Or will you do something with this? And like the women, I think sometimes I run away from the awesome truth of who Jesus is and what he can do. But I've found time and time again in my life that Jesus brings me back to that place where I have to face that big fear and say, Jesus, do I believe that you are bigger than this? Do I believe that because you've gone through death and you've been raised to life, that you are greater? You are greater than even death. What can mere man do to me? Don't be afraid of those that can burn the body. Be afraid of those that can affect the soul. That you are greater than this. I was recently praying with friends about an enormous thing that they are facing in their life, it's a death. It's a kind of death that they're facing in their relationship, in their marriage. It's a brutal time that they're going through. And it's been incredible being with them and watching them hold on and say, we can hold on in this marriage, in loving each other, in working through this, because the tomb is empty. Because there's hope. Because Jesus is not dead, he's alive. Because death has been destroyed once and for all. Because despair has been destroyed once and for all. We can hold on because the tomb is empty. And the last thing, keep eyes front. What I find fascinating about this passage, I don't know if you noticed it, is that Jesus is talked about, but he's not in it. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, every other bit of Mark, I'm sure he's there. Is this one of the only times that Jesus is the subject, but he's not actually in the scene? He's conspicuous by his absence. And I did a quick little, not very effective, sitting on the Bakerloo line, quickly checking through Mark's gospel. And the only other time I could find, so I might be wrong, the only other time I could find where Jesus is conspicuous by his absence is right at the beginning of Mark, the first 8 verses of Mark, where John the Baptist is saying, get ready, the kingdom of God is near. Get ready, get your hearts in tune with God. Line up your life, repent, turn, because something is about to happen. Someone is about to break on the scene who is going to change everything. Are you ready for this? And right at the end of Mark, he does the same thing. He removes Jesus from the scene and says, now Jesus is still on that march. He's not here. Where does the angel say he is? He's in Galilee. What good comes out of Galilee? Why are you in Galilee? Well, he began in Galilee, at the Sea of Galilee, saying the kingdom of God is here. And he began to choose his disciples. And Jesus is on the same mission. And he's there in Galilee doing it. He's risen, he's doing it. It's a beautiful march that he's been on all the way through Mark's gospel. We had a wonderful Leaders' Day yesterday, which Rod took us through. We had about 35 people. That's great, isn't it, having a church with so many folks with a heart to lead and serve. And Rod talked about one way you can sort of divide history, I suppose, is saying the creation, when God created everything good, and then decreation, when sin came into the world, and the beginning of the breakdown of relationships, alienation from God, everything's broken. And then the recreation, that God makes everything new. And this is the mission that God's on, that Jesus is on, and that hasn't changed. And in Revelation 21, verse 5, Jesus says, behold, I make all things new. Keep eyes front. Come with me. Look where I'm going. I'm making everything new. I went through death. I broke out the other side. I'm greater than anything that can destroy this. I'm making everything new. I want to be involved with that. Don't you? I think of some of my heroes and heroines of the faith throughout history. I can name quite a few Victorian ones, actually, like Gladys Aylward, who went to China. She was tiny. She was about this tall. And what did she see there? She experienced the divine pull of God, making all things new. And she saw that little children, little babies, Chinese babies, were having their feet wrapped so tightly to stop their feet growing. And this was causing all sorts of problems for them as adults. And she said, I'm responding to the divine pull of God, that God said this is not okay. I'm making all things new. Do something about this. And she did something about it, and it became illegal to wrap feet. And you think of William Wilberforce and the slave trade. And you think of Barnardos and Thomas Coram, who walked the streets of London and Liverpool and saw babies abandoned on the streets. And he experienced the divine pull of God saying, behold, I make all things new. This is not okay that babies are abandoned on the street. Do something about it. And I think about my friend who works in Radio 2. I'm not going to say what program he works on, but he loves Jesus. And he experiences the divine pull of God saying, when you're producing that show, you make sure that stuff goes out on air that is honorable. Jesus' name is not mentioned, but you can hear the times that he produces that show because he believes in a God that makes all things new. And so he's working to that end. I know teachers, head teachers, TAs, people who work in medicine, NHS, and they see their work as God calling them to make all things new. And the way they serve in those places is responding to the divine pull of God. And they get in their office and they say, the tomb is empty. And my colleagues are hopeless, but I'm not. They don't feel, sorry, they're not hopeless. They're not hopeless at their job. They feel hopeless. But there is hope. Do you see? Do you see? This is beautiful, isn't it? Jesus is alive. It changes everything. I suppose I just wanted to come back to the empty tomb and just end with a few thoughts before we move into communion. Because I think I am staggered when I read this passage. What is it in my life that I sometimes believe is greater than the power of God? What are the areas where I feel I'm losing hope? I remember when we were struggling with infertility, I remember there were many days when I thought, this is so hopeless. This is bigger than anything. God, you can't do anything with this. I can't have kids, so I'm fruitless. And Jesus said to me, I've broken through death and come out the other side. There is hope, there is life. And we adopted our daughter. And wow, what a gift from God she is. I wonder what it is that sometimes as you stand there at the entrance to the tomb, I wonder what is your sense of hopelessness that Jesus wants to speak to you tonight and say, I've broken through. The same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in you. We spoke earlier about being the intimacy and the power of God being available to us. I mean, wow. So just as you're thinking on that, I'm just going to read to you a few verses. I quoted Revelation 21, that wonderful verse of, behold, I make all things new. And we live in the light of Jesus, that empty tomb, and in the light of things to come as well, don't we? And in Revelation, it's that beautiful image of where we're heading. God once and for all making all things new. And as I read these verses, let me tell you how I picture these verses. You might like to as well. I read this passage at the end of Revelation 21, John's vision of a new heaven and a new earth. And I imagine being in a dark room and then somebody throwing open a door and the light from the other room just pouring into where I am. Just this beautiful golden, you can see little specks of dust floating in it. It's just this wonderful light flooding the room that I'm in. And I imagine just standing in that light saying, living now in this earth, we face suffering, but in the midst of suffering, we hold on to the promise of an empty tomb, which is the promise of hope, and knowing that one day we'll be with God forever, where there'll be no more. Well, let me read it to you, what there'll be no more of. And you might like to imagine that door being flung open. Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw the holy city coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne room saying, now the dwelling of God is with his people, and he will live with them. And they will be his, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed. The Sabbath is over. The new week is a new beginning. And he who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Amen. Alleluia.